This ghetto trash pulled a gun on me, Your Honor. Officer Martinez's voice boomed across the courtroom as he pointed directly at Dr. Keisha Williams. She screamed racial slurs and tried to run me down with her stolen car. Keisha sat motionless in the defendant's chair, her government briefcase at her feet, watching him fabricate each venomous lie with theatrical confidence. The defendant is a career criminal who thinks her welfare money buys her immunity, Martinez continued, his eyes blazing with manufactured righteousness. She threatened to have me killed and bragged about her gang connections. The prosecutor smiled. The gallery nodded. The judge scribbled notes, seemingly convinced by the 15-year veteran's sworn testimony. But every single word Martinez spoke was perjury. Complete fiction designed to destroy an innocent woman's life. What this corrupt cop didn't know was that his victim held a federal badge more powerful than his. Have you ever watched someone commit career suicide under oath? The courtroom was packed to capacity, tension thick in the air as Officer Martinez adjusted his crisp uniform and placed his hand on the Bible. His 15 years of service ribbons gleamed under the fluorescent lights as he swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Officer Martinez, the prosecutor began with practiced authority, please tell the court what happened on the evening of March 15th. Martinez cleared his throat and looked directly at the jury with the confidence of a man who had told this story a dozen times before. I was conducting routine traffic enforcement on Maple Avenue when I observed the defendant's vehicle traveling at excessive speed through a residential area. Standard protocol, Your Honor. He paused for effect, his eyes scanning the courtroom before continuing. When I initiated the traffic stop, the defendant immediately became belligerent and non-cooperative. She refused to provide her license and registration when requested. From her seat at the defendant's table, Keisha maintained perfect composure, taking careful notes on her government-issued tablet. Her federal training had taught her to document everything, especially lies told under oath. Did the defendant comply with your lawful orders? The prosecutor prompted. Absolutely not, Martinez replied, his voice growing more animated. She became increasingly aggressive, using profanity and making threats against my safety. She kept reaching toward her glove compartment despite my repeated commands to keep her hands visible. The first major fabrication. Keisha's pen moved steadily across her notepad, recording each false statement with the precision of someone who had conducted federal depositions. At what point did you feel your safety was threatened? The prosecutor continued. Martinez leaned forward dramatically. When she lunged toward what I believed was a weapon in her vehicle, I had no choice but to take defensive action. The defendant was clearly attempting to escalate the situation into a violent confrontation. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Several jurors shifted uncomfortably, their expressions growing more serious as they absorbed the officer's testimony. Did the defendant make any statements that concerned you? Yes, sir. Martinez nodded gravely. She claimed to have powerful connections who would, and I quote, make my life hell for pulling her over. She said people like me wouldn't have jobs much longer, and that she had friends in high places who could destroy my career. Another complete fabrication. Keisha's federal database access would later prove no such statements were ever made, but Martinez delivered each lie with Oscar-worthy conviction. Officer Martinez, the prosecutor paused for dramatic effect. In your 15 years of law enforcement, have you ever encountered this level of hostility during a routine traffic stop? Never to this degree. Martinez shook his head solemnly. The defendant's behavior was unlike anything I've experienced. She seemed to believe that her economic status somehow placed her above the law. The lies kept flowing like water from a broken dam. Martinez described a confrontation that existed only in his imagination, painting Keisha as an entitled, violent criminal who had attacked a dedicated public servant simply doing his job. What happened to your body camera footage of this incident? The prosecutor asked. Martinez's expression grew apologetic. Unfortunately, there was a technical malfunction with the recording device. These things happen occasionally with electronic equipment, especially during high-stress situations. The camera appeared to be functioning normally, but when we reviewed the footage later, the file was corrupted. How convenient. Keisha made another note, her expression never changing despite the blatant manipulation of evidence. Officer Martinez, can you describe the defendant's demeanor when backup officers arrived? She immediately changed her tune. Martinez replied with practiced timing. Suddenly she was calm and cooperative, trying to play the victim. Classic manipulative behavior. She even had the audacity to claim I had been unprofessional when the reality was quite the opposite. Martinez's partner, Officer Jenkins, sat in the gallery nodding along with every word, providing silent support for the fabricated narrative. The two had clearly rehearsed this performance. In your professional opinion, was this a legitimate traffic stop that escalated due to the defendant's actions? Absolutely, Martinez replied without hesitation. I followed all protocols and procedures. The defendant's aggressive behavior and apparent disregard for law enforcement created a dangerous situation that could have resulted in serious injury to myself or innocent bystanders. The prosecutor smiled with satisfaction. No further questions, Your Honor. As Martinez stepped down from the witness stand, he caught Keisha's eye and smirked slightly. The expression of a man who believed he had just delivered a flawless performance. His swagger was unmistakable as he returned to his seat, confident that his 15 years of service and spotless record would carry the day. The defense attorney, a young public defender named Sarah Lane, looked overwhelmed by the weight of Martinez's testimony. She shuffled through her papers nervously, clearly struggling to formulate a response to such seemingly credible allegations from a decorated officer. But Keisha remained perfectly calm, her federal training evident in every measured breath. She had prosecuted corrupt officials before, and she recognized the telltale signs of perjury. Martinez's story was too perfect, too detailed, too convenient. Real encounters with police were messy, unpredictable. This testimony sounded like it had been crafted by a committee. What Martinez didn't realize was that his entire performance had been documented by someone with the federal authority to prosecute perjury. Every lie, every fabrication, every deliberately false statement would soon become evidence in a much larger case about systematic corruption and civil rights violations. The prosecutor rested his case with visible confidence, certain that Officer Martinez's compelling testimony had sealed Keisha's fate. The gallery buzzed with whispered conversations about the dangerous defendant and the heroic officer who had risked his safety to protect the community. Martinez adjusted his uniform one final time and settled back in his chair, completely unaware that he had just committed multiple felonies in front of a federal law enforcement officer who possessed the evidence to destroy not just his career, but his freedom. The stage was set for a revelation that would transform this small-town courtroom drama into a federal case study of police corruption and the abuse of sworn testimony. The defense calls Dr. Keisha Williams to the stand. The courtroom fell silent as Keisha rose from her chair, her movements deliberate and composed. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to high-stakes testimony, her government briefcase remaining at the defense table as she approached the witness stand. The court clerk administered the oath with routine efficiency. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do, Keisha replied, her voice clear and unwavering. There was something in her tone that made several jurors sit up straighter, an authority that seemed to fill the room despite her soft-spoken delivery. Sarah Lane, the defense attorney, approached with visible nervousness. Dr. Williams, can you tell the court what actually happened on the evening of March 15th? Keisha's eyes swept the courtroom with the practiced gaze of someone who had testified in federal proceedings. Officer Martinez's testimony contains multiple material falsehoods spoken under oath, she began, causing a stir in the gallery. I will now provide the court with an accurate account of the events. The prosecutor objected. Your Honor, the defendant is making legal conclusions rather than stating facts. Overruled, Judge Harrison replied, leaning forward with obvious interest. The witness may continue. Keisha nodded respectfully. At approximately 8:30 p.m., I was traveling southbound on Maple Avenue at 25 miles per hour, the posted speed limit. I was returning from a professional meeting regarding federal oversight protocols for local law enforcement agencies. The specificity of her language caught Martinez's attention. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, something about her professional terminology striking him as unusual for a typical defendant. Officer Martinez initiated a traffic stop without probable cause, Keisha continued with clinical precision. I immediately pulled over, turned off my engine, and placed my hands on the steering wheel in clear view, standard procedure for any interaction with law enforcement. "What happened when Officer Martinez approached your vehicle?" Sarah asked. Initially, the interaction proceeded normally. I provided my driver's license, vehicle registration, and proof of insurance when requested. However, Officer Martinez's demeanor changed dramatically when he examined my documentation. Keisha paused, her expression remaining perfectly neutral. When he saw my residential address, which indicates I live in an affluent neighborhood, his entire approach shifted. He began making comments about people like me and questioned how I could afford to live where I do. Martinez's jaw tightened. Her recollection was uncomfortably accurate, though he hadn't expected her to remember their conversation with such detail. "Can you describe Officer Martinez's specific behavior?" the defense attorney prompted. "He began engaging in what federal civil rights guidelines classify as pretextual harassment," Keisha replied, causing the prosecutor to object again. "Your Honor, the defendant keeps making references to federal guidelines. What qualifications does she have to cite such authorities?" Judge Harrison looked curious. "Miss Williams, what is your professional background?" "I hold a doctorate in criminal justice administration and have extensive experience with federal law enforcement oversight protocols," Keisha answered smoothly. "I've testified as an expert witness in federal court proceedings involving civil rights violations." The courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations. This was clearly not the typical defendant they had expected to see. Sarah Lane pressed forward. "What did Officer Martinez say to you during the stop?" He asked. "How does someone like you afford to live in that neighborhood?" When I politely declined to answer questions unrelated to the traffic stop, he became increasingly hostile. He stated that people from your kind of background need to learn respect for authority. Martinez's face was growing red. Her testimony was devastatingly accurate, but he had counted on his word against hers. Cop versus criminal. He hadn't anticipated facing someone who spoke like a prosecutor. "Did you make any of the statements Officer Martinez described?" Sarah asked. "Absolutely not," Keisha replied firmly. "I remained seated throughout the encounter with my hands visible. I spoke respectfully and made no threats of any kind. I did not reach for any objects, nor did I attempt to leave my vehicle. These allegations are demonstrably false." "How can you be so certain about these details?" Keisha's expression remained composed, but there was something almost knowing in her eyes. "I've been trained to observe and document interactions with law enforcement. Professional habit, you might say." The prosecutor stood for cross-examination, clearly hoping to rattle her composure. "Miss Williams, isn't it convenient that your version of events contradicts Officer Martinez's testimony in every detail?" "Truth often contradicts lies, Counselor," Keisha replied evenly. "That's the nature of perjury." "Objection!" the prosecutor shouted. "The defendant is accusing a sworn officer of perjury." "Sustained," Judge Harrison ruled, but his expression suggested he was taking note of Keisha's unusual command of legal terminology. The prosecutor tried again. "Do you have any evidence to support your claims against Officer Martinez?" Keisha paused for a moment, her eyes meeting Martinez's across the courtroom. "I have documented this interaction using methods consistent with federal evidence collection protocols. When the appropriate time comes, I will present that documentation to the court." Martinez felt a chill run down his spine. There was something about her calm confidence that unsettled him. Normal defendants were nervous, angry, or desperate. This woman spoke like someone who held all the cards. "Dr. Williams," the prosecutor pressed, "you seem remarkably well-versed in legal procedures for someone facing criminal charges." "I've had extensive professional exposure to the criminal justice system," Keisha replied. "I understand the importance of accurate testimony and the serious consequences of providing false statements under oath." As she spoke, Keisha's eyes moved to her briefcase at the defense table. Inside were federal case files, Department of Justice credentials, and evidence that would soon transform this local courtroom into the center of a federal civil rights investigation. "No further questions," the prosecutor concluded, clearly frustrated by his inability to shake her testimony. As Keisha returned to her seat, Martinez watched her with growing unease. Something about this woman was different, dangerous even. She spoke with the authority of someone who had prosecuted cases rather than defended against them. What he didn't know was that Dr. Keisha Williams had spent the last 3 years conducting undercover investigations of police departments across the region. Her traffic stop wasn't random bad luck. It was federal evidence collection in action. The real trial was just beginning. The evening light filtered through the windows of Keisha's home office as she methodically arranged federal case files across her mahogany desk. The walls were lined with law enforcement certifications, Department of Justice commendations, and photographs from civil rights conferences, a professional sanctuary that few people had ever seen. Her daughter Maya, 16 and sharp as her mother, knocked softly on the door. "Mom, you've been in here for hours. Are you okay?" Keisha looked up from a thick folder marked Confidential DOJ Civil Rights Division and smiled wearily. "Just preparing for tomorrow's court appearance, baby." "The case where that cop lied about you?" Maya's voice carried the indignation of youth. She had inherited her mother's sense of justice along with her intelligence. "Among other things," Keisha replied, pulling up Martinez's file on her secure government laptop. "Sometimes stopping systematic lies becomes your job, and tomorrow is one of those days." Maya perched on the edge of the desk, careful not to disturb the carefully organized documents. "What do you mean?" Keisha gestured to the files spread before her. "Officer Martinez thinks he lied about some random black woman who got uppity during a traffic stop. What he doesn't realize is that he committed perjury against a federal law enforcement officer conducting an official investigation." The laptop screen displayed Martinez's personnel record. 15 years of service, dozens of commendations, and buried deep in the digital archives, 47 complaints that had been mysteriously dismissed or downgraded. Keisha had spent months accessing federal databases, cross-referencing incident reports, and building an airtight case against systematic corruption. "Is he going to jail?" Maya asked, studying the evidence with the analytical mind her mother had fostered. "Perjury is a felony, sweetheart. But more importantly, his lies in court tomorrow will become evidence in a much larger federal investigation." Keisha pulled out another file, this one containing video footage from surveillance cameras, body cam data recovered from federal servers, and witness statements from Martinez's previous encounters. Her phone buzzed with a text from her DOJ supervisor. "Evidence package approved for court presentation. Authorization code follows." Keisha opened her secure briefcase and began loading it with the tools of federal prosecution. Her Department of Justice credentials sat in a leather wallet next to federal subpoena forms and civil rights violation documentation. Each item represented years of training and the full authority of the United States government. "Mom," Maya said quietly, "are you scared?" Keisha paused in her preparation. "Nervous, maybe, but not scared. I've prosecuted corrupt officials in federal court before, and I've seen what happens when people abuse their power systematically. Tomorrow, Martinez's lies will catch up with him in ways he never imagined." She pulled up a video file on her laptop, security footage from the store near where Martinez had stopped her. The timestamp showed the entire encounter, contradicting every single element of his sworn testimony. But this was just the beginning. "The beautiful thing about federal investigations," Keisha explained to her daughter, "is that we have resources local courts don't. When Martinez claimed his body camera malfunctioned, he didn't know that federal oversight protocols require backup recording systems. When he thought he could lie without consequences, he didn't realize that civil rights violations are federal crimes." Keisha's desk phone rang, her direct line to DOJ headquarters. "Dr. Williams, this is Director Lane. Are you ready for tomorrow's revelation?" "The evidence is ironclad," Keisha replied. "Martinez's perjury is documented, his pattern of civil rights violations is established, and his department's systematic cover-ups are fully exposed. When I present my credentials tomorrow, this small-town courtroom is going to become the center of a federal civil rights case." Maya listened in amazement as her mother discussed prosecution strategies with federal officials. This was a side of her mother she rarely saw. Not just the caring parent, but the federal law enforcement officer who had dedicated her career to fighting systematic injustice. After ending the call, Keisha closed her briefcase with finality. "Tomorrow, Maya, you're going to see what happens when someone commits perjury against a federal inspector. Martinez thinks he destroyed some random woman's credibility. Instead, he just handed us the evidence we needed to dismantle his entire department's culture of corruption." "Will you be safe?" Maya asked, genuine concern in her voice. Keisha smiled with quiet confidence. "Baby, I carry the full authority of the Department of Justice. Martinez is about to learn that some fights choose you, and tomorrow federal accountability chooses him." As mother and daughter headed downstairs for dinner, Keisha's briefcase sat ready by the door, containing not just her defense, but Martinez's complete destruction. The morning sun streamed through the courthouse windows as court reconvened, the gallery packed with curious spectators who had heard rumors about the previous day's unusual testimony. Judge Harrison called the session to order, his expression suggesting he expected this case to take an interesting turn. "Your Honor," Sarah Lane announced with newfound confidence, "the defense calls Mr. David Park to the stand." A nervous-looking Korean man in his 50s approached the witness stand, adjusting his glasses as he was sworn in. Martinez shifted uncomfortably in his seat, not recognizing the witness but sensing potential trouble. "Mr. Park, please state your occupation for the record," Sarah began. "I own Park Electronics on Maple Avenue, about 50 yards from where the alleged incident took place on March 15th, he replied in accented but clear English. The prosecutor objected immediately. "Your Honor, we weren't provided notice of this witness." "The defense discovered this evidence only yesterday," Sarah responded. "Mr. Park has security footage that directly contradicts Officer Martinez's sworn testimony." Judge Harrison leaned forward with obvious interest. "I'll allow it. Please continue." Keisha watched from the defendant's table, her federal training evident in how she observed every detail of the unfolding drama. She had spent years building cases based on evidence just like this. "Mr. Park, do you have security cameras on your property?" Sarah asked. "Yes, 4 high-definition cameras with audio recording. They cover the entire street frontage, including the area where the traffic stop occurred. The system records continuously and stores footage for 90 days. Martinez's face went pale. In his 15 years of fabricating reports, he had never considered that independent surveillance might exist beyond the police department's control. "Did you review the footage from March 15th? "Yes. After I heard about the case on the local news. What I saw made me very concerned about Officer Martinez's testimony." The prosecutor stood quickly. "Objection. The witness cannot comment on testimony he wasn't present to hear." "Sustained," Judge Harrison ruled. "Mr. Park, please limit your testimony to what you observed." Sarah approached with a tablet. "Your Honor, the defense would like to present Exhibit A, security footage from Mr. Park's surveillance system." The courtroom's large monitor flickered to life, showing a clear view of Maple Avenue on the evening in question. The timestamp read 8:31 p.m. as Keisha's sedan pulled over after Martinez's patrol car activated its emergency lights. "Mr. Park, please describe what the footage shows," Sarah instructed. The black woman, the defendant, immediately stops her car and turns off the engine. She places both hands on the steering wheel where they remain visible throughout the encounter. On screen, the footage confirmed his testimony. Keisha sat perfectly still in her driver's seat, her hands never moving from the wheel except to retrieve documents when requested. Martinez squirmed as his lies began unraveling in real time. "What happens when Officer Martinez approaches the vehicle?" Sarah continued. "At first, everything appears normal. He asks for documents and she provides them calmly, but then..." Park paused, pointing at the screen. "You can see his body language change completely when he looks at her license." The footage captured the exact moment Martinez's demeanor shifted, his posture becoming aggressive, his gestures increasingly hostile. "Does the defendant ever reach toward her glove compartment in a threatening manner, as Officer Martinez testified?" "Absolutely not," Park replied firmly. "Her hands never leave the steering wheel except to hand him her documents. She never makes any sudden movements." The prosecutor objected frantically. "Your Honor, this witness is characterizing the defendant's movements rather than simply describing them." "Overruled," Judge Harrison replied, clearly fascinated by the unfolding contradiction. "The witness may describe what he observed." Sarah pressed forward. "Mr. Park, your security system records audio as well. Did you hear the conversation between Officer Martinez and Dr. Williams?" "Yes, and it was very disturbing. Officer Martinez made several inappropriate comments about where she lived and how she could afford her address. He became increasingly hostile without any provocation from the defendant." The audio crackled to life through the courtroom speakers. Martinez's voice was clearly audible. "How does someone like you afford to live in that neighborhood? People from your kind of background need to learn respect for authority." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Several jurors looked shocked at the obvious racial undertones in Martinez's comments. "Did the defendant make any threats against Officer Martinez as he testified under oath?" Sarah asked. "None whatsoever. She remained completely calm and respectful throughout the entire encounter. She said yes, sir, and no, sir, consistently." Martinez's lies were crumbling before his eyes. What he had described as a violent confrontation was revealed as professional harassment of an innocent citizen. "Mr. Park, in the footage, does the defendant appear to be under the influence of drugs or alcohol?" "Not at all. She speaks clearly and follows all instructions immediately. Her behavior is completely cooperative." Sarah paused for effect. "Mr. Park, based on what you observed, would you say Officer Martinez's sworn testimony accurately described what happened that evening?" The prosecutor objected, but Judge Harrison allowed the question. "Officer Martinez lied," Park stated simply. "Everything he said under oath was false. The defendant never threatened him, never reached for anything, never became aggressive. She was the victim of harassment, not the aggressor." As the footage continued playing, the contrast between Martinez's fabricated testimony and the recorded reality became undeniable. The dangerous criminal he had described was revealed as a composed, professional woman being systematically harassed by a corrupt officer. "Your Honor," Sarah announced, "the defense calls Mrs. Eleanor Washington to the stand." An elderly black woman approached the witness stand with dignity despite her obvious nervousness. Martinez's eyes widened in recognition, another ghost from his past coming back to haunt him. "Mrs. Washington," Sarah began, "have you had any previous encounters with Officer Martinez?" "Yes, ma'am. Last September, he stopped me outside my church and treated me terribly, made the same kinds of comments about how I didn't belong in certain neighborhoods." The prosecutor objected to relevance, but Judge Harrison overruled him. "I'll allow testimony about Officer Martinez's pattern of behavior." "Did Officer Martinez file an accurate report about your encounter?" Sarah asked. "Lord, no," Mrs. Washington replied with surprising steel in her voice. "He wrote that I was belligerent and threatening, just like he said about this young lady. But the church security cameras showed I never raised my voice or made any threatening gestures. Pure lies, every word." As witness after witness took the stand, a clear pattern emerged. Martinez had been filing false reports for years, systematically targeting black citizens and fabricating evidence to justify his harassment. In the defendant's seat, Keisha took careful notes on her government tablet, documenting each revelation with the precision of a federal prosecutor building a civil rights case. Martinez had no idea that his perjury was being recorded by someone with the authority to turn his lies into federal charges. The prosecution's case was disintegrating, but the real earthquake was still coming. Judge Harrison called for a brief recess as the implications of the contradictory evidence settled over the courtroom. When court reconvened, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Martinez sat rigid in his chair, sweat beading on his forehead as his fabricated testimony crumbled around him. "Your Honor," Judge Harrison began, "given the substantial contradictions between Officer Martinez's sworn testimony and the independent evidence presented, this court has serious concerns about potential perjury. Before we proceed, I want to give both parties an opportunity to address these discrepancies." The prosecutor stood nervously. "Your Honor, Officer Martinez stands by his testimony. Perhaps the surveillance footage doesn't capture all angles of the incident." Sarah Lane rose with newfound confidence. "Your Honor, the defense has additional evidence that will conclusively demonstrate Officer Martinez committed perjury. However, this evidence requires a disclosure that will fundamentally change the nature of these proceedings." Judge Harrison leaned forward with interest. "What kind of disclosure, Counselor?" Sarah looked at Keisha, who nodded and stood with quiet authority. The entire courtroom held its breath as she approached her briefcase and retrieved a leather credential wallet. "Your Honor," Keisha said, her voice carrying a new gravity that filled the courtroom, "I need to present federal evidence and disclose my true identity for the record." She opened the wallet and held up her credentials for the court to see. "Dr. Keisha Williams, Senior Inspector, Civil Rights Division, United States Department of Justice." The courtroom erupted. Gasps echoed from the gallery. The prosecutor's mouth fell open. Several jurors sat back in shock, but no one reacted more dramatically than Officer Martinez, whose face drained of all color as the magnitude of his situation crashed down on him. "Federal inspector?" Judge Harrison repeated, clearly stunned. "Dr. Williams, are you testifying that you are a federal law enforcement officer?" "Yes, Your Honor. I hold federal law enforcement authority and have been conducting an undercover civil rights investigation of this police department for the past 18 months. Martinez felt the world spinning around him. He had just committed multiple acts of perjury against a federal officer. In federal court, under oath, on the record. "Your Honor," Keisha continued with clinical precision, "what Officer Martinez characterized as a routine traffic stop was actually documented evidence collection in a federal civil rights investigation. Every aspect of our interaction was recorded using federal surveillance protocols." She approached the bench and handed Judge Harrison a thick folder. "This contains my federal credentials, authorization for the investigation, and documentation proving that Officer Martinez's entire testimony constitutes perjury in a federal civil rights case." The prosecutor looked like he might faint. "Your Honor, we had no knowledge that the defendant was a federal officer. Because I was operating undercover as authorized by federal civil rights statutes," Keisha replied smoothly. "Officer Martinez's traffic stop of my vehicle, his subsequent harassment, and now his perjured testimony are all evidence in a systematic investigation of civil rights violations by this police department." Judge Harrison studied the credentials carefully. "Dr. Williams, these appear to be authentic federal law enforcement identification. Are you stating that Officer Martinez has committed perjury against a federal inspector?" "That is exactly what I'm stating, Your Honor. Officer Martinez has knowingly provided false testimony under oath regarding his interaction with a federal law enforcement officer conducting an official investigation." Martinez's lawyer whispered frantically in his ear, but Martinez could barely hear him over the roaring in his head. He had destroyed his own career, committed multiple felonies, and handed the federal government ironclad evidence of his corruption. "Furthermore," Keisha continued, "the federal investigation has documented a pattern of similar civil rights violations by Officer Martinez spanning 3 years. His perjury today is consistent with false reports he has filed in 47 previous cases involving black citizens." The gallery buzzed with shocked conversations. Local reporters frantically scribbled notes, realizing they were witnessing a massive federal case unfold in real time. "Your Honor," Keisha said, returning to her seat with calm authority, "I request that this court recognize the federal jurisdiction of this matter and notify the United States Attorney's Office that perjury charges should be filed against Officer Martinez immediately." Judge Harrison sat in stunned silence for a moment before speaking. "Dr. Williams, this court recognizes your federal authority. Officer Martinez, you have just committed perjury against a federal law enforcement officer in my courtroom. This is now a federal matter." Martinez slumped in his chair, the full weight of his destruction settling over him. He had thought he was lying about some random black woman. Instead, he had just handed the Department of Justice everything they needed to destroy him completely. The small-town traffic case had just become a federal civil rights prosecution. "Your Honor," Keisha announced, rising from her seat with federal authority, "as the victim of Officer Martinez's perjury and the investigating federal officer in this civil rights case, I request permission to cross-examine the witness under federal jurisdiction." Judge Harrison nodded gravely. "Given the extraordinary circumstances, Dr. Williams, you may proceed." Martinez watched in horror as the woman he had tried to destroy approached him with the calm confidence of a federal prosecutor. His hands trembled as she opened a thick federal case file and placed it on the podium directly in front of him. "Officer Martinez," Keisha began, her voice carrying the weight of federal law enforcement, "you are still under oath. Do you understand that perjury against a federal officer is a felony punishable by up to 5 years in federal prison?" Yes," Martinez stammered, his earlier arrogance completely evaporating. "Good. Now, you testified under oath that I threatened you during our traffic stop. That was a lie, wasn't it?" Martinez's lawyer started to object, but Keisha cut him off. "Your Honor, I'm conducting a federal investigation. This witness has already committed perjury against a federal officer." "Answer the question, Officer Martinez," Judge Harrison ordered. I may have misremembered some details, Martinez mumbled. Misremembered? Keisha's voice sharpened. Officer Martinez, you swore under oath that I lunged toward what you believed was a weapon. Federal surveillance footage proves I never moved my hands from the steering wheel. That wasn't a misremembering. That was perjury. She opened the federal file and pulled out a thick stack of documents. Officer Martinez, are you familiar with the federal database of police misconduct complaints? Objection, the prosecutor called out. Relevance? Your Honor, Keisha replied calmly, this witness has committed systematic perjury as part of a pattern of civil rights violations. The federal investigation reveals the scope of his criminal behavior. Overruled. Continue, Dr. Williams. Keisha turned back to Martinez, who was now visibly sweating. Officer Martinez, according to federal records, you have filed false reports in 47 cases over the past 3 years, all involving black citizens, all containing fabricated evidence, all supported by perjured testimony. The courtroom fell silent except for the sound of Martinez's labored breathing. Let me read from your report dated September 12, 2024, Keisha continued, pulling out another document. You claimed Mrs. Eleanor Washington became belligerent and threatened physical violence, but church security footage shows she never raised her voice. Another lie under oath, wasn't it? I don't remember that specific case, Martinez whispered. How about March 3, 2024? You testified that Mr. James Robinson resisted arrest and attempted to flee, but federal review of the body camera footage shows he complied fully with all commands. Another fabrication, Officer Martinez? Martinez's partner, Officer Jenkins, slowly stood up and walked out of the courtroom, clearly distancing himself from the unfolding federal disaster. Officer Martinez, Keisha pressed forward relentlessly. Federal analysis of your reports shows a consistent pattern. Every time you encounter a black citizen in an affluent neighborhood, you fabricate evidence of criminal behavior. Then you commit perjury in court to support your false reports. Isn't that accurate? I just do my job, Martinez stammered weakly. Your job? Keisha's voice rose with controlled fury. Your job is to fabricate evidence. Your job is to commit perjury against innocent citizens. Your job is to violate the civil rights of people based on their race. The gallery erupted in angry murmurs. Several community members who had suffered similar treatment began speaking up from their seats. Federal investigators have documented 17 separate instances where you lied under oath about black citizens, Keisha continued, her federal authority filling the courtroom. Each lie was designed to destroy innocent people's lives. Each act of perjury was a federal crime. Martinez broke completely. People need to respect authority. Some people think they're better than others because of where they live. So you decided to teach them lessons by fabricating criminal charges and committing perjury? Keisha demanded. I never meant for it to go this far, Martinez whispered, finally admitting his guilt. Officer Martinez, Keisha said with finality, you have just confessed to systematic perjury and civil rights violations against multiple citizens. As a federal law enforcement officer, I am placing you under federal investigation for conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law. She turned to Judge Harrison. Your Honor, this witness has confessed to systematic perjury. I recommend immediate notification of federal authorities and suspension of Officer Martinez pending federal criminal charges. Martinez slumped in his chair, completely destroyed. His career was over, his freedom was in jeopardy, and his lies had just become evidence in a federal civil rights case that would destroy his entire department. The federal government had finally caught up with his systematic corruption. Judge Harrison called for a brief recess to consult with federal authorities and the district attorney's office. When court reconvened, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Word had spread throughout the courthouse that a federal civil rights case was unfolding in real time. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Judge Harrison began solemnly, you have witnessed extraordinary testimony today. Before we proceed to close in arguments, I want to address the federal implications of what has occurred in this courtroom. He turned to Martinez, who sat slumped in his chair like a broken man. Officer Martinez, you have confessed under oath to systematic perjury and civil rights violations. I am immediately notifying the United States Attorney's Office of your admissions. You are hereby suspended from all law enforcement duties pending federal investigation. Martinez's badge and weapon were collected by court security as he sat in stunned silence, the weight of his federal crimes crushing down on him. Dr. Williams, Judge Harrison continued, as the investigating federal officer and the victim of Officer Martinez's perjury, would you like to present a closing statement to this court? Keisha rose with quiet dignity, carrying herself with the full authority of the Department of Justice. She approached the jury with the confidence of someone who had prosecuted corruption at the highest levels of government. Members of the jury, she began, her voice carrying throughout the packed courtroom, you have witnessed something extraordinary today. You have seen systematic corruption exposed by the light of federal accountability. She gestured toward Martinez without looking at him. Officer Martinez didn't just lie about a traffic stop. He committed perjury against a federal law enforcement officer conducting an official civil rights investigation. But more importantly, you've learned that his lies today were part of a pattern spanning years and dozens of victims. The jury hung on every word as she continued. For 3 years, Officer Martinez has been weaponizing false testimony against black citizens. He would fabricate criminal behavior, file false reports, then commit perjury in courtrooms just like this one to destroy innocent people's lives. Keisha walked to the evidence table and picked up the federal investigation files. 47 documented cases of false reports, 17 instances of perjury under oath, systematic civil rights violations designed to terrorize citizens based on their race and economic status. Several jury members shook their heads in disgust as the scope of Martinez's crimes became clear. Officer Martinez thought he could lie about me because he saw a black woman who wouldn't be believed over a decorated police officer, Keisha continued, her voice growing stronger. He didn't know that his victim carried federal law enforcement authority. He didn't know that every lie he told was being documented for a federal civil rights prosecution. She turned to face the gallery where community members who had suffered Martinez's abuse sat with tears in their eyes. But I wasn't his only victim. Mrs. Washington is here. Mr. Robinson is here. 17 other citizens are here today because they want justice for the lies that destroyed their reputations, cost them jobs, and traumatized their families. The prosecutor sat in stunned silence, knowing his case had completely collapsed. There was no defense for documented confessed perjury against a federal officer. Members of the jury, Keisha said, returning her attention to them, perjury isn't just lying. Perjury is the weapon that corrupt officials use to destroy justice itself. When a police officer lies under oath, he doesn't just attack his victim, he attacks the entire foundation of our legal system. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the courtroom. Today, you've seen what happens when federal oversight meets local corruption. Officer Martinez's lies have been exposed, his pattern of abuse has been documented, and his criminal behavior will face federal prosecution. Judge Harrison nodded approvingly as Keisha delivered her final points with prosecutorial precision. The evidence is overwhelming. Officer Martinez committed perjury against me, against Mrs. Washington, against Mr. Robinson, and against every citizen whose lives he destroyed with false testimony. Federal law is clear. Systematic perjury and civil rights violations are serious federal crimes. She looked directly at Martinez for the first time. Officer Martinez, your badge didn't give you the right to lie. Your uniform didn't give you the authority to fabricate evidence. And your 15 years of service don't excuse 3 years of federal crimes. Turning back to the jury, Keisha concluded with quiet authority. Members of the jury, justice isn't just about this courtroom today. Justice is about ensuring that no other citizen suffers what I suffered, what Mrs. Washington suffered, what 17 other victims suffered at the hands of Officer Martinez's systematic lies. The jury deliberated for less than 30 minutes. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous. Not guilty on all charges against Dr. Keisha Williams. But the real justice came moments later when federal marshals entered the courtroom with arrest warrants. Officer Martinez, the lead marshal announced, you are under arrest for conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law, systematic perjury, and obstruction of justice. These are federal charges. As Martinez was led away in handcuffs, the gallery erupted in applause. Community members who had suffered his abuse for years finally saw justice served by federal authority. Judge Harrison banged his gavel for order. This court finds that Officer Martinez committed systematic perjury and civil rights violations. The federal investigation will continue, and additional charges may be forthcoming. Keisha packed her federal case files with quiet satisfaction. Martinez's lies had finally caught up with him, and federal justice would ensure he never abused his badge again. Outside the courthouse, news cameras captured Martinez's arrest as he was loaded into a federal transport vehicle. His career was over, his freedom was gone, and his systematic corruption had been exposed for the world to see. Federal accountability had won. 6 months later, the transformation was complete. The courthouse that had once protected Officer Martinez's lies now displayed a federal consent decree mandating systematic reforms throughout the entire police department. What had begun as one man's perjury had exposed a culture of corruption that reached every level of local law enforcement. Martinez sat in federal prison, serving a 5-year sentence for conspiracy to violate civil rights, systematic perjury, and obstruction of justice. His pension was revoked, his law enforcement certification permanently stripped, and his name had become synonymous with police corruption throughout the region. The decorated officer who had built his career on lies was now a cautionary tale about federal accountability. But Martinez wasn't alone. The federal investigation that Dr. Keisha Williams had initiated led to charges against 8 additional officers, 3 supervisors, and the police chief who had covered up years of false reports. The Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division had transformed a local traffic case into a comprehensive examination of systematic abuse. Dr. Williams stood at the podium of the National Civil Rights Conference, addressing an audience of federal prosecutors, civil rights attorneys, and community activists from across the country. Her case had become a model for how federal oversight could dismantle local corruption and protect citizens' constitutional rights. When Officer Martinez committed perjury against me, she told the packed auditorium, he thought he was destroying one woman's credibility. Instead, he handed federal investigators the evidence we needed to expose systematic civil rights violations affecting dozens of innocent citizens. The audience erupted in applause as she continued. Truth doesn't fear investigation, lies do. And when public officials weaponize false testimony against citizens, federal law ensures that justice will prevail. Her teenage daughter Maya watched proudly from the front row as her mother received the Department of Justice's highest commendation for integrity and service. The woman who had been humiliated and lied about in a small-town courthouse had become a national symbol of federal accountability and civil rights protection. The police department that had once protected Martinez's corruption now operated under strict federal oversight. Body cameras were mandatory and tamper-proof. All arrests required independent verification. Officers received federal civil rights training, and any complaint of false reporting triggered automatic federal review. Mrs. Washington, whose own encounter with Martinez's lies had been vindicated, approached Dr. Williams after the ceremony. "Thank you for showing us that federal justice still exists," she said with tears in her eyes. "You saved our community from years more of his abuse." Community members who had suffered Martinez's systematic lies found their voices again. 17 victims who had been silenced by false charges saw their records expunged and received federal compensation for civil rights violations. Their stories, once dismissed as complaints against a decorated officer, were now part of federal court records documenting systematic corruption. Dr. Williams returned to her federal work with renewed purpose, knowing that one moment of revealed truth had protected countless future victims from police perjury and civil rights abuse. The message was clear. When authority figures lie under oath, federal oversight ensures accountability. When local corruption tries to silence citizens, federal law provides protection. And when systematic abuse threatens constitutional rights, federal justice delivers consequences. Share this story of truth defeating lies. Subscribe for more federal accountability cases. Hit the notification bell because justice needs witnesses to corruption. Like this video if you believe federal oversight protects our constitutional rights. Remember, heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they carry federal badges and the courage to expose systematic lies, one perjury charge at a time.
The story you heard today wasn't cleaned up. It was told exactly as it happened. At Black Voices Uncut, we believe that's the only way truth can live. If you felt something, hit like, comment, and your reaction, and subscribe. Every week, we bring you voices that refuse to be silenced.